Actually, while Rita's setting me up, because I'm really not good on computers, I'm going to just introduce myself. I'm Rita O'Donoghue. Or if you're a local, I might be Eva's sister if you're in business, or Dawn's sister in business, or if you're in football, and Davey's sister, or, you know, if you're from Crossmolina there, I'm Mary's sister, but there's a lot of us in it. But I'll be dealing today with Eris. Yes. So there we are, there's Eris, just in case somebody here who isn't from Eris. And I did my doctoral thesis just a few years ago on the role of women in death and burial customs in Eris, with evidence from the folklore. So it's post-famine, so that's say 1850 to 1950. And I came up with some really, what for me is fascinating information about the centrality of women to death and burial customs. But you're only going to get a snippet today. And I will say, apparently I'm the only speaker from now. The next speaker is after lunch, is that correct?
Yeah.
So the doors are locked. You're my audience now. I'm not good at timing, and I tend to like my subject, so it's probably going to go over a little bit. I didn't put this on, but I will be dealing with the supernatural women and the natural or real women in the NFC archives. But I want to share with you a snippet that I read. Eileen O'Donoghue, one of the female collectors from Eris, wrote in 1954. She said, St. Bridget was born in Ireland, lived in Ireland, and not alone was she a great Irish saint, but she was the one to raise the Irish women and the women of the whole world from the slave life to give them equal rights in the world. And I think that's interesting in light of what I'm hearing today. But that is Eileen O'Donoghue. Whether that happened in the folklore or not is quite another matter. But anyway, that's St. Bridget and Eileen O'Donoghue from 1954. Today, I propose to present a series of stories or narratives collected by the National Folklore Collection collectors. I'll deal with that in a minute. From the local narrators here in Eris, some of whom were women. They had in total about 500-600 males and maybe 200 or 300 females from whom they gathered information. These stories are based on supernatural or otherworld places and events involved or associated with women's agency, women's representation. Specifically, I examined stories surrounding the Cailleach and the Banshee and examined the close affiliation that ordinary women were perceived to have with these otherworld peoples or entities or sources. I'll also pose the questions about whether these phenomena what they might have meant in the context of their time, but also importantly, to consider how we might explain and interpret them in light of our current experiences and understanding. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. Somebody asked me, was I going to get onto the Queen? If I do, you'll be hitting at the door. Well, I'll try and get it in, but we'll see how we go for time. And I have a clock somewhere, a little phone, to remind me when I'm going too far. But just to give you the classification system, the Irish Folklore Commission, it was called then. It's now the National Folklore Collection. Because I think in Ireland we have a penchant for change, for rebranding, as though it changes anything. But these were the classification system. So you can see there's 14 of them. Now, much of the information I got was from the religious tradition, principles and rules of popular belief and practice, human life, that's where I got my death and burial customs. I also got them from nature, I got it from folk medicine, I got it from livelihood, settlement, everywhere. Popular oral tradition. So there was a 700-page questionnaire around all of these. I might deal a little bit more about it in a moment, but let me talk about women. They've long, as we have heard very vocally this morning, women have been airbrushed. Particularly I think of Pierce's surrender picture and the two shoes at the bottom of the picture, out of historical events. And even where their presence has been noted, it's often in a subservient role, a sideshow for the main, usually male event. Additionally, depictions of the female often contain the most fundamental stereotypes. They're either nurturing or caring, the good woman, or they're sinister and evil, the bad one. So we have, when we know we're both, actually. But anyway, it reminds us that information, whether in oral or written form, is often used to condition our attitudes, to persuade our sensibilities, and to inform our judgments. It's important to bear this in mind when any information is presented, so that we, personally, are able to make a fair assessment of these sources and discern or determine a meaning or purpose in them. It's important, too, to bear in mind that folklore is from an oral tradition. So, without writing, memory is everything. These are stories that have been passed on. They vanish unless they're transmitted. Folklore is passed down in traditional communities, but it's also what people choose to tell. Who asks them? And what's considered valuable? So, for example, one of the criticisms about the folklore collection is that it didn't include a lot of women's issues. The question of who the author is of a piece of work is you're never sure. People tell stories, but you're never sure who they are. So today, I won't be making any fast judgments, but you might start to interpret them for yourself. So I'm going to just situate the sources I've mentioned, the national folklore. Its aim was to collect and preserve the lore of the people, the ordinary people. Here we're not looking at kings, queens, and leaders. We're looking at the ordinary, everyday people of Eris, especially in the dwindling tongue, which, of course, is Irish. You'll notice that I'm very careful about speaking it because I'm aware that my grammar is very bad. There we go. Throughout these years, that was from 1935 until 1970-71, the National Folklore Collection was amalgamated with the Department of Folklore at UCD, not in Galway, they'd hope. But throughout this time, a series of Balahories, collectors, some of them local, went around Eris, collecting stories from one and sundry, all over the barony. So you'll get a selection of them today. Now, there's an actual example of one, so you'll see what they were doing. There's Eris up in the right-hand corner. I'm going to get dyslexic now, so you'll bear with me. Condawió, Barantucht, Eris, Balaam Werridge, Anya Ní Ruan, Shráid America, so Annie Ruan. And who was the collector? Anya was the collector. She collected from Moranig Andrew, a banshee, a housewife, from Balaam Werridge, but she came from Carrotty. And she got it 20 years ago, and that was in 1955. Tauschna, ghosts. So that's the standard. They're the kind of stories that were collected, from various males or females, just to give you an idea. More examples. And there's Ellie MacDonald, the woman who said St. Bridget released us all from bondage. I'm sorry that this book of folklore is not as clean as it should be, knowing the length of time it is tossed around the house. Please send me another books and I will be glad to fill it. She didn't. They said, no, we won't be sending you any more. You did get a little payment for it. And I suspect, but anyway, that's a different story. I'm dealing with the supernatural. The other one is about a band Síolta, and again, it's from Eris and it's Tomása Burka. So they're just for you. Oh, I did put her in. Look, she's in there. There, you can be reading that while I gather my thoughts. The collection is one of the largest and more sustained projects of collection of oral material containing millions of manuscripts, audio recordings, photos, drawings and paintings, all collected by full and part-time collectors employed by the, as it was then, Irish Folklore Commission between the years 1935 to 71, under the directorship of Seamus O'Donoghue, who was James Hamilton de Larga. So documents, we've got them now. Here we go, Eris. I'm dealing with the Cailleach, all right, to start with. So whether it's St. Bridget or the Cailleach that sent us the reminder that we can't control everything and that Mother Nature has her harsh side. Certainly this morning we saw the force of nature, or Mother Nature as it would be. So I'm using this, place names have an important part to play in the history, the memory and the identity of a locality. They assign meaning to features and events that occurred within the community, and they serve as a reminder, a marker and a commemoration of events and of people, past and present, supernatural in this case and natural. So the importance of place can be seen here, where several offshore rocks bear the name of and are associated with an Cailleach. Generally an older woman, the hag as known in English, or the crone if you want to call her that, or I call her the advanced species of womanhood. Now, in their publication of the cartography of Dún Chríochán, Anshin McGrath and Trasny Gary, for whom thank you very much for the picture, they locate references to the petrified hag off the coast of Kilgalligan. Offshore from Anduna, the main, I can't point to it, but the main part up there, I'm reading them out for you now. There are a number of rocks, one of which is referred to as the Cailleach. Another rock is Tóna Cailleach, the backside of the hag. Óhanna Cailleach, the channel of the hag, a narrow strait or channel of navigable water out there. The three rocks at the base are called the three Cailleach Anduna, said to be three hags under a spell. So it's like a living landscape. The Cailleach is petrified, but she's there, and her sisters. Although there is a story where girls, there was a lot of the entries in the folklore about Fuda being kidnapped. So they went down to hide from their would-be suitors and were drowned in the cave. So I'm not sure if that's the same story, so I have to be very careful. There will be locals who can put me right on that one. So the living landscape, according to Seamus O'Cahon and Patrick O'Flanagan, who also wrote about that area, the area down in Carrotide, involves not only real places, but includes a rich body of fairy lore relating to the supernatural, all enmeshed and interconnected. Here, stories of the Cailleach's exploits and longevity are scattered throughout the folklore archives of Eris as well as elsewhere. They parallel those of the Cailleach Vera, which is, of course, Kerry is known for her looking out to sea, waiting for her manman to come and de-stone her or unstone her. I mean, stoned now, of course, is a very different expression, so we need to be careful. But anyway, the Cailleach was perceived as a spellbound hag. Her petrification is achieved by her transformation in stone of the Cailleach Vorna, she's called here. Some say it's not the Cailleach Vorna, but merely the haunt of a spirit until the day of judgment. Now we're getting to the grit of why she is petrified and spellbound. As an antidote or caution against her power in order to counteract her evil nature. When anything or anybody new was encountered, it was uncustomary. These are taken from folklore archives. These aren't my own words. The Cailleach, it was customary to curse her in order to negate any harm she might engender. So they would say, Mara Vosh ar an Cailleach Vera. The death band is the Mara Vosh that you can put around somebody when they died. So wishing her dead. And then they often called her the Cailleach Vregi, not Vera. Vregi meaning liar, so death to the lying Cailleach. So you can see that reinforcing her image as a thieving, scoundrelly hag without religion. or without conscience. There she is, petrified because she's without conscience. And this one, Rose ní Thuchail in 1914. What I've only put up is, I don't expect you to read the Irish, put it here. Isn't it strange that a child is unable to They say it was the colic vera who caused it. Since the time the child was born, she left its hand on its back and left the child with the power to walk shortly after birth. According to two narrators, Rose ní Thuchail and Biddy Rooney, the thieving, scoundrelly hag, was the most famous witch in the world. She had wonderful powers. There is no name, though, in the world more hated than her. Her ambition was to destroy the world and everything living on earth. She tried her evil power on the child with the depression in the back of your thigh, so that in the thighs of a young child, and even when full adolescence is reached, the track of her fingers, she put them in to stop a child from walking. Had she succeeded fully in her experiment, mankind would only be a lot of crawling creatures at the mercy of other animals, if we were to survive at all. Fortunately, the wicked witch did not meet but with scant success in this direction. And but for her evil work, a child would be able to walk around and play immediately after coming into the world. So that is a reason given. Now, I want to look a little bit of theory, if you don't mind, to look at the archetype of the Great Mother. So I bring in a little bit of theory from various, Eric Newman, Condren will come in here, all the writers about the Great Mother. The archetype of the Great Mother has been outwardly expressed in many cultures and periods since prehistory as a primordial image of the human psyche, where the feminine has been represented variously as goddess, monster, gate, pillar, tree, moon, vessel, and every animal, from snakes to birds, and particularly in the Irish, to hares, where the colic is often thought to be able to transform into a hare. She is intimately associated with the land itself. She's a central figure in Nordic, Scottish, Irish, and Celtic traditions, where she is presented simultaneously as nurturer and destroyer of humanity, but also as mother and warrior. As with the Melch Mammut, the mothers, the old women, they haunt the countryside of Ireland and Scotland, and they're depicted, as I said, either as a fierce goddess of war and death, but also as a radiant sovereign of fertility and abundance. So we have the screaming goddess of war in the Nordic tradition, but we also have her as, with her superhuman energy, as aspects of the divine goddess, continuously transforming or transitioning from hag to virgin and back again to reflect the agrarian cycle of life in the seasonal changes and the eternal renewal of the land. In fact, you'll find W.B. Yeats does it in Countess Kathleen when all the young men sign up to be warriors. She is transformed from the old woman into the young one. So there is that idea of it. In Ireland, and that's where she has been used, or she appears as a figure in learned and popular medieval tradition, in the politics of the Anglo-Irish literary revival, and of course, as I said, in nationalist traditions and oral popular traditions. So as a hag or a colic, she is both helpful and destructive to human life and people. Very often she is associated with wilderness, the raven, and storms, of course. She features in the landscape, and of course we know that she's associated with the burial grounds Nauf and Dowth in Meath, Kirkadivna in southeast Kerry, the sea god Manman, and with Lug, the god prototype of sacred kingship. There's a further rock in Kilgalligan, and look at, I don't know if you can see it clearly, but she always reminds me of Queen Victoria with her snub, the famine queen. But there is another rock with Oncalia Crum. It's out along the coast of Cathrin and Glock, and its appearance would suggest the outline of an old woman in a stooping position. So, just a cautionary note, not all places, you see how women can be intimately, and men, connected with the locality in which they're associated. But there's Cnuk na Cali actually, but Morani Garvan gave that in 1941. That was just a place where an older lady died. So that's why it was gutted. Why na Cali, the graves of the girls who dropped off Kilgalligan coast. So there's, again, however, what's important about the Cailleach is, no, I won't give you that yet, I want to read it a little about it. I think it was mentioned earlier. St. Patrick vanquishes the hag on Croagh Patrick. So if you bear with me, the storytellers then said that he went in pursuit of, Patrick went in this pursuit of the Cailleach Vera, who up to the inception of Christianity was the greatest witch in the whole world. And hearing of St. Patrick's Christianizing mission, she was on her way from County Cork, where she had a temporary residence, to Lough Derg, which was at this time a pagan place of pilgrimage, in fact the most prominent in Ireland in pre-Christian days. So I'll continue with Biddy Rooney's testimony. This would have been before the coming of St. Patrick. Lough Derg was the Mecca of Irish pagans, and it was the dreadful witch, the Cailleach Vera, possessed as she was of extraordinary powers of witchcraft. She decided at once to travel to Lough Derg, where she could exercise her magical powers, and of course St. Patrick, learning that the witch was travelling, decided to intercept her, for if she succeeded in reaching that place, she might cause terrible evil, for her powers of black magic were immense. And knowing of the saint's mission and his great success in the wonderful numbers of converts he was making, she deemed that her own day of pride and power was well at an end, and her only hope that calamity could be avoided. But however, St. Patrick was not so easily deluded. He overtook her on Croagh Patrick, and there she was vanquished, and all her works were henceforth irretrievably ended, and the domination of Lough Derg in its magical pagan ascendancy destroyed and superseded by the doctrine of Christianity. So, I did say to you at the outset, you have to look at who's writing and what agenda they have. And it has to be said from, again, a little bit of theory, from the onset of from the 5th century onwards, the onset of when, of course, the saints came in there and had many, many converts, this older belief system of supernatural beings that coincided with the ancestral dead, they jostled for supremacy with the new religion. Christianity, whose greater social power and prestige gradually replaced the status of the old gods to become the hegemonic religion in Ireland. Subsequent demonization of the female was a feature of the Christian quest for dominance, where the early monks of the newly imported Christian religion sought to superimpose its own saints and religious traditions onto older deities, shrines, and sacred sites, many of which were associated with the female. So that's taken from Diarmuid O'Gillan, who's written about religion. And so you have two cosmologies competing with one another for dominance. And I think we have one here where we have one of these instances of the oppositional forces colliding. Now, anybody that's good at Irish, you're welcome to read that, but for those of us who aren't so good, it's a place they call Fiadon na Gaelic, the women's broker stream. It's a lonesome spot in which many ghosts have been seen and many strange things heard. When the priest was passing by the place, he heard the sweetest and the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. He was listening to the song, which was sung in English, and he stood there entranced for some time. But eventually he remembered his errand to visit a dying person, and he'd better hurry, so off he went. When he passed the spot where he had heard the music, what did he see but two dogs? And it was they who had been singing. What were they but two evil spirits who were set out to delay the priest, in which they had succeeded, because by the time he got to the dying person, they were dead. The priest then cursed the song, which was in English, and it was never heard again. So the priest is momentarily beguiled. And when he gets to the house, now I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, but the boy who dies, there's another story in it, and I'm going to put it in even though I shouldn't because I'm running out of time as always. But the young man is there and he comes back to life. And he says, don't worry about the priest, his horse lost its shoe, but I'm fine, I'm at the gates of heaven. If you wash my feet, he tells his mother, I'll be fine. And then Banu Shevlin from Bangor, who was a great corpse washer, Ban Vaughan, said there are only two washings that matter in the life of a person, the first and the last. And because he's got his last one, the first is of course the baptism of the communion into the Christian church. Although of course there have been water ritual services, especially you'll see them in Scandinavian countries long before Christianity, where water is used to cleanse the newborn child. But the last washing, according to Banu Shevlin, is the washing of the corpse, which of course is against all Christian teaching. So you can see that the opposition there to women is coming fairly and shortly. Now, I have to hurry on because of course, look at my half hour is up, I say. Oh, here. I'm fine, aren't I? And the door is locked, as I said. Except I'm pleased that Lilith got in. So that's the Cailleach in as quickly. She is presented as antagonistic to humanity, antagonistic to Christian religion. But you have to remember at the start of it, I said who's writing it, who wants dominance, and thus she is. Now the other supernatural woman we have is the Banshee. And I've taken this picture because I was told, don't put writing up in the board, put pictures up. This is Thomas Crofton Croker, 1825. And there you have the moon and the old lady and and the castle. So she's crying the dead of the Irish. But let me move on with it. I was told also, I know I have all these people who give me advice. Young people usually say, make it more exciting. Come in with a real story and scare them. But here's the story. And this isn't from Eris per se, it's from Patricia Lysat, who wrote about the Banshee. But she talks about her as a washerwoman with a beetle in one hand, a comb in the other. And Which O'Regan, he's the human protagonist, he's stolen her comb. That's often the case. They steal the Banshee's comb. He snatches the comb from her, leaps swiftly across a stream, which of course supernatural can't, you follow, and sets off homeward with utmost speed. A dramatic pursuit by the beetle-wielding Banshee across bog and swamp ensues in the direction of the O'Regan's house, but the local hero, running faster than the March wind, manages to avoid the beetle after the pursuing, screaming Banshee throws at him, and to reach the safety of his house, just as the Banshee throws the beetle for the third time, strikes the gable of the house, and splits it in two even halves. Well, that would keep anybody away from Banshees. And of course, she's outside at night, which an ordinary woman wouldn't be able to. And he has to get to the threshold into the house, which of course is where women were confined, the house and the hearth, to get to safety. There's lots of stories around it, but again, as I say, I have to move on. But the Banshee, Ruairi O'Donoghue in 56, in 1940, he said, I myself heard an old woman from this townland saying that once, and she on the hill in the middle of the day heard the crying, a crying more poignant and yet sweet than she'd ever heard. She listened to it for some time, and by nightfall they heard a man had been drowned. You have to look at her as a screaming person, or you look at the Banshee as the most poignant, sad sound, depending on who's telling you about her. She's generally heard in the liminal hours of darkness or in the early mornings. The cry of the Banshee, or the otherworld woman, she is from the fairy mound, so the woman of the mound, or the otherworld woman. Her forewarning could be regarded as means